who invented a theory of linguistics called tagmemics. Um, I met Pike one evening in 1976, if I remember rightly. Can't remember whose house he was at. My brother actually directed me to the meeting, but he didn't go himself, even though he'd been on an SIL training course. Been on one or two SIL training courses before. Anyway, I wanted to say that I read somewhere that Pike believed in making an act of faith, and I think he meant making an act of faith, perhaps in believing that tagmemics is going to give you the answer. Maybe he was saying that. And it suddenly occurred to me that I have operated like that way in the past. When I was doing an exam, or when I was maybe doing some work, I'd probably make an act of faith that the work I was doing was going to have a positive outcome. And this is probably important to have this act of faith because it meant it was marshalling energies which otherwise wouldn't perhaps have been being time pressures on me to do other things. The time I spent could easily have been frittered away and not made available. So what I'm thinking today is that maybe an act of faith is something that we can apply to this theory of denotational semantics. There have been other theories, important theories. Lambeck was one by a mathematician from the 1950s who only died recently. He had some theory of language. Unfortunately, I can't understand the papers that he writes. I find the notation too obscure. It's a bit like reading a book by Gottlob Frege. I couldn't understand him either. What I'm thinking is that the accounts of denotational semantics that I've generally seen, papers that are published, have a fairly high degree of unreadability. And I think the problem is maybe they're trying to do too much. Maybe they don't need to do a lot. Maybe you only need a very, very, very simple grammar in order to explain what's going on in natural language. As far as I can see, most of natural language can be accounted for by a noun, a verb, and optionally another noun. And there are other things that you'll want to add on there. You may want to add on other phrases. For example, if you add an adverb, if you say, I took the car to town, well, the to town, you can read that as an adverb that's added on to the sentence. I guess you could possibly see it as modifying the verb, or you can see it as modifying the whole sentence. And the other thing you can do is that you can have arbitrarily complex items in a sentence. For example, if you've got a noun, you can make it arbitrarily complex, for example, by adding an adjective to it. The reason I say it can be arbitrarily complex is that the adjective doesn't even have to be a word. It could be an arbitrarily complex phrase. Let's see. I could say I took the car that I bought yesterday to town. The car that I bought yesterday. So the car that I bought yesterday here is a noun phrase, but it's complex because it's got a sentence in it. So here, that followed by a sentence, and that in fact could be optional. You could say the car I bought yesterday, I took to town or something. You could say so if you write the car that I took to town yesterday, that is declaring the thing that follows. In this case, it's declaring that what follows is a sentence. And that sentence modifies the preceding noun. So it's an adjective. All I'm saying is you don't need very much grammar, as far as I can see, to explain certainly a quasi-infinite number of complex sentences in English. I don't know if this covers all of English or whether they're bits and pieces that you have to account for in some other way, but I suspect that it actually covers all of English. So if that's the case, why are we making such a fuss about the complexity of theories of grammar? So if you look at some masterpiece like Schmidt's book on denotational semantics, it goes on for hundreds of pages and it's explaining the denotational semantics of different constructs in programming languages. And for that reason, the readability of that book, it's down very, very low as far as the number of people who are actually going to wade through that book must be very small. Presumably, you've already done a course in programming language semantics before you attempt to wade through Schmidt's book. That would be my guess. Maybe most people that would wade through Schmidt's book have already done a course in programming language semantics. Now, programming language semantics is, I think it's presented as some kind of, quote, capstone course for computing. And what this actually means, I'm just speculating that it's got a hidden meaning, that actually what it's doing, it's bolting in place some view of the world. It's bolting something into place. And I'm just suspecting that there are alternative views of the world that probably need to be explored as well. What I'm offering is an act of faith that these simple little papers that people write, 5 or 10 pages long, explaining the grammar of some fragment of English. I'm just speculating that you only need 5 or 10 pages to explain the grammar of all of English. That's the hypothesis that I'm offering to you. So this is very different from what we've been told. We've had professors of linguistics saying that you have to write 500-page grammar to cover most of a language. Now, all I'm saying with your 5 or 10 pages is that it's a sketch. I'm not questioning that there's 500 pages of detail that somebody can dredge up and present it in some palatable form. I'm not questioning that. I'm just arguing that maybe you can have a very meaningful kind of interpreter for English that only uses a very, very tiny number of rules. Now, if this is true, it's quite interesting. It's a very interesting sociological phenomenon, the fact that this isn't being revealed. We're being kept in the dark about this. We're certainly being given the impression that you need to do endless study of English grammar before you can come up with something as, how dare this person come up with a suggestion that you can write out a denotational semantics of English in a few pages. One reason I think it's probably true is that Strachey is famous for something else besides denotational semantics. He's famous for writing a macro processor called GPM, which he published in 1965 in Computer Journal. And he's got pages and pages of very detailed account of how the system works. And it's not easy reading for the uninitiated. I've never waded through his description of how it works. But what is interesting about it is that if you've had a lot of experience in writing a lot of computer code, and I've had a lot of experience writing computer code for many years, it doesn't seem very simple, because GPM is something that a person could code up for themselves, presumably code it up quite easily in a few weeks. I won't try and say any more than that. But it's very interesting then that someone claimed that languages like HTML had actually been invented because the idea was that you could write an interpreter for it in 3 weeks. That's what I read. I read that somewhere. I forget now if they're talking about HTML or whether they meant XML, whether they meant a particular little flavour of HTML for some particular application area. They were saying you could write an interpreter for it in 3 weeks. I thought that was very interesting because if you can do that, you can certainly write an interpreter for GPM in 3 weeks. And the idea was that to say 3 weeks meant that it was very easy. And to say it was very easy basically meant you didn't have to write any documentation on how you'd done it. It was just common sense. So my take on Strachey's work is that you can actually throw out the account of how his program works. People have been saying since 1980 that specification is implementation if you provide an appropriate language. And that would mean, for example, some people have suggested Prolog is such an appropriate language. So it'd be interesting for that reason to find people writing interpreters for GPM or XML in Prolog. So that's what I'm going to look for now. I'm going to look on the net now for exactly that.